I'll never forget the moment my phone buzzed with that message. The very same day my father died, the darkest, most gut-wrenching day of my life, my so-called best friend admitted that she had already spilled my most painful secret to not just her boyfriend, but to a woman I considered my enemy. Imagine that for a second. You're barely holding yourself together after watching your dad take his last breath. Your heart feels like it's been ripped out of your chest. And then, out of nowhere, the one person you trusted most looks you in the eye, or worse, sends you a casual message and basically tells you she's betrayed you. That's where the story begins. And trust me, it only gets uglier from here. Now, before I take you all the way through the roller coaster of grief, betrayal, and eventually revenge, I need to back up just a little so you can really understand the gravity of what went down. I'm 33 years old, a daughter, a mother, and up until a couple of months ago, someone who truly believed in lifelong friendships. My dad was my rock. He wasn't perfect, but he was steady, loving, and the kind of man who would quietly suffer just to make sure no one else had to. In May, doctors diagnosed him with stage 4 cancer. It was everywhere. Lungs, bones, spreading fast like wildfire. From the moment he heard the words, he was calm in a way I still can't fully understand. He told me very directly, "I don't want to suffer. If it gets worse, if I lose myself, I want euthanasia." I didn't argue. I wanted to. Every part of me wanted to beg him to fight, to hold on. But this was his choice, and what could I do except respect it? Still, I carried that knowledge like a stone in my chest for weeks. I didn't tell anyone at first, not even my closest friends. I just couldn't bear to say the words out loud. But eventually, when the end became real, when we went to the clinic to schedule the actual euthanasia date, I confided in 2 people. Just 2, my best friends. And I begged them, with tears in my eyes, "Please don't tell anyone. This stays between us." You'd think that after nearly 20 years of friendship, after endless nights of laughter, tears, and secrets shared, that request would be sacred. But you'd be wrong. Fast forward to July. It's a Friday I'll never forget. The day my dad died. The day I sat by his side, holding his hand as he slipped away. My world went quiet in that moment. It's like time stopped, and all I could hear was the pounding of my own heart and the faint echo of his last breath. I stumbled through the motions after that, numb, hollow, barely human. Somehow, I still managed to send a voice note to my 2 best friends in our private chat. "Girls, my dad died. Please don't tell anyone it was euthanasia." My voice cracked as I said it, but I trusted them to hold that line for me. And then came her response. Cool, detached, like she was commenting on the weather. "Oh, well, I told my man and also this one girl because she asked." I swear to you, I felt my stomach hit the floor. My entire body went cold, like ice water had been poured through my veins. Did I hear that right? Did she just say she told not just her boyfriend, but the one person in our social circle I absolutely despised? The one who had bullied, gossiped, and caused drama for years? She gave her the most private, sensitive piece of my soul on the very day my father died? "What?" I typed back, shaking so hard my thumbs barely worked. "What do you mean you told her?" Her excuse was laughable. She said something like, "Oh, she already knew," which was impossible, completely impossible. And even if, by some miracle, it were true, the point wasn't whether the girl knew. The point was that my so-called best friend had no right to confirm it, no right to expose something so raw, so personal, something I specifically asked her to keep locked away. And do you think she apologized? Do you think she had the decency to say, "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said that"? Not once, not a single word of remorse. Just excuses, manipulation, and a tone that suggested I was overreacting. That was the moment it hit me like a brick wall. In nearly 20 years of friendship, she had never once apologized to me. Not for anything. Meanwhile, I had bent over backwards countless times, swallowing my pride, saying sorry 1,000 times over just to keep the peace. She had never once met me halfway. Now, if the story ended there, maybe I could have tried to chalk it up to grief, making me hypersensitive. But it didn't end there. It got worse. The funeral came. That day was a blur. Grief has a way of wrapping itself around you like a fog, muffling everything except the pain. But even through that haze, I noticed something I'll never forget. After the service, I stepped outside, expecting, hoping to see my friends waiting for me, just like we had done for each other before. 2 years ago, when her mom died, we all stood outside with her, holding her up through her grief. 3 years ago, when another friend's grandpa passed, same thing, same location, same tradition. It's what we did. We didn't leave anyone alone in that moment. But when it was my dad, they were gone. All of them. They left me standing there, fresh from burying the most important man in my life, utterly alone. And that's when the second grief set in. I wasn't just grieving my dad anymore. I was grieving the friendships I thought I had, the people I thought would stand beside me when the world crumbled. And they weren't there. And I can't bring myself to answer. I see her at daycare drop-offs, at school pickups, and every time I feel my chest tighten with dread. It's like being haunted by a ghost that refuses to acknowledge what it did. You ever feel like you're grieving twice? Once for the person you lost, and once for the people who showed you who they really are. That's where I am. And honestly, I don't think I can ever forgive her. But here's where things start to shift. Because betrayal like that doesn't just fester, it ignites something. It pushes you to a breaking point. And once I hit that point, I knew I had a choice. Let her keep haunting me, or find a way to make sure she never had that power again. And the road I chose, well, let's just say it wasn't forgiveness. What would you have done in my shoes? Would you have cut her off cold turkey? Or would you, like me, start thinking about how to make her finally face the weight of what she'd done? The thing about betrayal is that it plants a seed. At first, that seed is just raw pain, confusion, disbelief. You ask yourself over and over again, how could she? Why would she? After everything we've been through. But if you water that seed with silence and unanswered questions long enough, it starts to grow into something else. Anger. And eventually, anger sharpens into clarity. For weeks after my dad's death, I tried to keep my head down. I told myself, focus on your daughter, focus on your mom, focus on work. I pretended that walking away from the group chat was enough. But every time my phone lit up with her name, every time I passed her at daycare drop-off and saw her smug face pretending like nothing had happened, that seed of anger grew a little taller. And you know what I realized? She had never, not once, faced consequences for the way she treated me or anyone else. She manipulated, she twisted words, she spread secrets when it suited her, and she always got away with it because people like me covered for her, apologized for her, forgave her. Not this time, not after this. That's when the idea started to form. If she was going to betray me, if she was going to humiliate me and spread my dad's most private decision to the one person I despise, then maybe it was time she felt what betrayal really looked like. Maybe it was time I reminded her that trust is not a game. Now, I'm not the type of person to go nuclear right away. Revenge, at least for me, had to be slow, layered, a lesson she'd feel in her bones without me ever lifting my voice. And the best part, she'd never see it coming. The first step was simple: information. For years, this girl had gossiped about everyone in our circle. She told lies, stretched truths, whispered things she shouldn't. But gossip leaves trails. People remember. And because I'd always been the one who listened, who nodded and comforted, I had a mental vault of every story she'd ever told me about someone else. Stories she'd sworn me to secrecy on. Stories that weren't even hers to tell. And I thought to myself, if she can casually hand over my dad's euthanasia to the one person I despise, why should I protect her dirty laundry anymore? So I started reconnecting quietly with some of the girls from the larger group chat, the 10 of us who had once been close before the fractures. I reached out casually, asking how they were, making small talk, bringing up old memories. And then, like dropping breadcrumbs, I began letting little truths slip. Nothing explosive at first, just enough to make them pause. Oh yeah, funny. She once told me you felt insecure about that. Or, wait, didn't she say something different about you the other day? It didn't take long before the group started piecing it together. Whispers became questions. Questions became doubt. And doubt once planted spreads like wildfire. But here's the thing about revenge. You can't just rely on gossip. You can't sink to their level and expect it to land. You have to hit where it hurts most. And with her, what mattered most was image. She loved being the center of our little circle, the queen bee, the one everyone came to for advice or sympathy. She thrived on being needed. So my plan was to isolate her, strip her of the very thing she valued most: control. The opportunity came quicker than I expected. A mutual friend was planning a big event, something all the girls were invited to, something she would absolutely attend. I knew if I played it right, this would be the stage. So I prepared. I gathered screenshots, old messages, little receipts she had forgotten existed, proof that she lied, manipulated, spread secrets when it suited her. And she always got away with it because people like me covered for her, apologized for her, forgave her. Not this time. Not after this. The week leading up to the event, I barely slept. I kept running through scenarios in my head, asking myself, am I really going to do this? Am I really about to blow up nearly 2 decades of friendship in one night? And then I'd remember her message the day my dad died. Oh, I told my man, and also this one girl. Like it was nothing. Like my pain was just another piece of gossip to toss around. And my hesitation would evaporate. The night of the event, I walked in calm, collected. But inside, my heart was pounding so hard, I thought people could hear it. She was already there, of course, smiling, laughing, acting like she was the life of the party. She waved at me like nothing had ever happened, like she hadn't left me standing alone at my dad's funeral. I smiled back, polite, controlled. Because revenge isn't about rage. It's about patience. As the night went on, little conversations formed in clusters. And at just the right moment, when she was surrounded by the people she thought adored her, I dropped the first bomb. A casual story she had once told me about another girl in the circle, twisted and cruel. I didn't embellish it. I didn't need to. The truth was enough. Faces dropped. Eyes turned. And for the first time in a long time, I saw her falter. But I wasn't done. Not even close. One by one, I let the stories spill. Gently, strategically, in conversations where she couldn't deflect. Every lie she had spun, every cruel comment she had whispered, every betrayal she thought was buried, it all came crawling into the light. And the beauty of it? I never once had to raise my voice. I never had to say, she betrayed me. I just let her own words do the work. By the end of the night, she wasn't the queen bee anymore. She was the outsider. People avoided her, whispered about her, side-eyed her when she tried to join in. And I stood back, calm, collected, almost detached, watching the empire she built on gossip crumble brick by brick. Was it petty? Maybe. Was it satisfying? Absolutely. And yet, as I drove home that night, my hands still trembling on the wheel, I couldn't help but wonder, was it enough? Would you have stopped there? Or would you have pushed further, made sure she never had the chance to claw her way back into power again? I didn't know then how messy things would get before the dust finally settled. I thought the party night would be the turning point, one decisive blow that would topple her throne. It was a blow, yes, but the real work was in what came after. The pushback, the gaslighting, the allies she tried to buy back, the small explosions that nearly blew the whole thing up. Revenge isn't a movie where one scene fixes everything. It's 1,000 tiny scenes where you hold your breath, wait, and hope the next card you play won't reveal you too soon. The morning after the party, my phone blew up. Not with congratulations, not even with curiosity. It was the slow drip of messages that tell you the water's reaching the ceiling. What happened last night? Is she okay? Okay. Did you say X about Y? I didn't answer most of them. Let them stew. But I did get one text that made my chest sink. Her boyfriend. He sent a long, angry message demanding to know what I'd said. He accused me of starting drama for no reason, of trying to ruin her. I stared at the screen until my eyes watered. There it was, the reflex. The way her people reacted first was always to circle the wagons, not to ask questions. Loyalty over truth. That panic could have made me fold. I almost texted back an apology just to stop the noise. But I didn't. Instead, I drafted a calm, measured reply that would give nothing away, but would sow a tiny seed of doubt. We need to talk in person when you have time. There's more you don't know. I hit send and felt both foolish and dangerous. She didn't respond for a full day, and I thought I'd won again. But then the universe sent me a cautionary call. A mutual friend, one I had been quietly rebuilding trust with, pulled me aside at the grocery store. Her voice was low, eyes darting like she was trying to find a camera. "Listen," she whispered. "She got to Jen. She's telling people you're the one who started it. She says you're the one stirring things up, trying to ruin the group because you're jealous. People are talking. I felt the floor tilt. Of course she would flip the script. Of course she would make herself the victim. That was her favorite trick. Act wounded and people rush in to comfort the actor while ignoring the actual victim. That's when the plan needed to get smarter. I realized I had to control the narrative without looking like I was controlling it. I couldn't be the loud one calling people out. She knew how to weaponize that. So I became quieter, subtler. I started reaching out individually to the people who still mattered, those who had the tendency to listen rather than react. I didn't spill everything at once. I dropped the right pieces at the right time, like giving someone a puzzle piece and letting curiosity do the rest. Do you remember when she said X about Y? I was shocked. I couldn't believe anyone would say that. People would probe, and when they did, I let the truth fill the space. Not accusations, not theatrics, just facts. Little granular truths that added up to something none of us could ignore. She noticed the shift. That was the dangerous part. The moment your enemy starts to sense the trap, she began to fight back. At first, it was whispers, little comments mailed to the group chat. Why is she being so weird? I thought we were friends. Then, like a crack running through a wall, came direct contact. She messaged my mom. She called my work and left a message with a mutual coworker playing the part of the wounded friend I supposedly wronged. She was professional, practiced. She played the most pitiful violin, and suddenly she had people calling me, asking if I was okay, telling me I should just apologize to keep the peace. It was insidious. People would rather sign away their moral curiosity for comfort. The real close call happened 3 weeks into the silent war. I had been careful, schedules arranged so I wouldn't bump into her with the kids, conversations off the record, nothing that could be misconstrued as dirt digging. But life, as it always does, threw a curveball. Our kids' daycare announced a fundraiser, a little family fair, and everyone was expected. No getting out of it. I debated skipping, I really did, but my daughter wanted the face paint and the bouncy castle, and the thought of denying her that on top of everything felt cruel. So I went. I walked in expecting tension, but what I didn't expect was the full theatrical performance. She was there, sun hat and sunglasses, playing nice with our mutual friends like nothing had changed. She saw me, and for a moment I thought she'd glare, or worse, ignore me. Instead, she hugged me, public, long, dramatic, and said, loud enough for nearby parents to hear, I just want everyone to be at peace. I didn't tell anyone anything that wasn't already known. We all need to move on. The crowd exhaled. A few people clapped, small, awkward claps. My chest tightened. The optics were terrible. For a second, the public performance of her contrition made me look like the villain. I felt tears sting. My instinct, the raw animal part of me that wanted justice and immediate rectification, rose like tidal water. I wanted to stand up right there and tell the truth in the microphone, to show the receipts, to make her explain herself in front of everyone. Instead, I smiled and walked away because I'd learned that scenes like that are exactly what she wanted, drama she could monetize for sympathy. That night, I sat alone with my daughter asleep in the other room and crafted the next move. If she could stage a public performance and tilt the narrative in her favor, I needed a plan that would make the truth unavoidable without me looking like the hand that placed the truth in front of everyone. I needed allies, patterns, and timing. I needed to exploit the one thing she couldn't fake: people's memories and records. The next morning, I began a campaign of quiet retrieval. I combed through old group messages, saved screenshots, and collected the small but numerous examples of her duplicity. Things she had said to me, things she had told others that contradicted what she told me, the lies she told that had directly impacted other people. There was a thread where she had talked trash about someone's postpartum depression after telling the person she supported them. There were voice notes where she had admitted jealousy over someone else's promotion while she presented herself as supportive. None of these were crimes. None of them were fireworks on their own. But together they formed a pattern. A woman who cared more for story than for people. I started to build a quiet dossier. Call it that if you like, but it was more like a slow, methodical exhibition of truth. I printed things out when I needed to, saved screenshots in a private folder, and most importantly, I logged everything with dates and context. People often underestimate the power of dates. Memory is fallible, but a time-stamped on a message is not. When you can point to the exact moment something was said, the argument loses its breath. Her stories had always relied on fuzziness. "I don't remember saying that," she would say, or "you misunderstood." But placed next to a dated message, her "I don't remember" started to sound like a defense tactic rather than actual amnesia. And so I waited. Not passively, but patiently. I watched how she tried to stitch herself back into the fabric of the group. I watched her bring gifts to people, to draw them in with small kindnesses. I watched her try to manipulate mutual friends into vouching for her character, painting herself as the wounded one betrayed by a jealous ex-best friend. It was ugly, but predictable. I wanted, more than anything, for her to make a misstep. Humans always do when they're backed into a corner. They flailed. She flailed by reaching out to one of the girls who'd been the most hurt by her past gossip, someone who had been on the receiving end of her cruelty years ago and who had every right to be furious with her. She sent a long, contrite message, made public apologies, and in the same movement tried to pass off a smattering of blame onto the broader group. The recipient didn't bite. She'd been keeping receipts too. She decided not to forgive easily, if at all. That was the crack I needed. We staged the reveal the way you'd stage a quiet intervention. No fanfare, no group meeting called to air grievances, just a dinner with a few select women who still cared about fairness more than comfort. I sat down across from people who had known me since I was a teenager. We ate, we laughed at old jokes, and then the conversation slid toward past hurt. Someone mentioned a previous slander, and someone else asked, "Do we remember exactly how it was told?" I listened to the conversation, and then I very calmly asked if I could show something. I put my phone on the table, opened the thread, and let the messages speak. We scrolled. People's faces shifted. Shock, then recognition, then anger. That's the emotional rhythm of truth. It first wounds, then it clarifies, then it galvanizes. Once more voices joined, the momentum shifted. She wasn't just one woman who'd been mean to another woman. She was a pattern that had harmed several people. The group slowly and reluctantly shifted from protective to investigative. Motives were questioned, memories were reframed, and that momentum built into something that couldn't be shepherded back into complacency by her apologies. At this point, she could have tried to salvage things by owning up to it, by apologizing genuinely, by making reparations to the people she'd hurt. But apologies are tricky. They only work when they're sincere and when the offender understands the harm. She did neither. Instead, she tried to turn things into a morality tale about me. She suggested that my actions were politically motivated, that I was attempting to ostracize her for attention, and worst of all, she manipulated her boyfriend and a few loyalists to whisper doubts into people's ears. There were nights I lay awake hearing the echo of her voice, imagining the whispers. She's unstable, she's got an agenda. And I felt panic rise. Would my careful build crumble under a new onslaught of smears? Would I be painted as the vindictive ex-best friend who couldn't let go? That's the terrifying part about going after someone who's built an identity on manipulation. They have no qualms about tearing you down with false narratives. But in my dossier, I had evidence. I had not only old messages, but also witnesses, people who remembered specific things, dates, and conversations. I had real, human accounts of the way she'd hurt others. So I made the decision to escalate again, but in a way that exposed her for who she was without making me look like the puppet master. I contacted a woman who used to be close to her, but who had been pushed out of the group years earlier because of the bully's behavior. She was hesitant. She'd been deeply hurt and rightly cautious. I told her the truth. I explained why I was doing this, not for revenge in the petty sense, but to stop a pattern that hurt everyone. She agreed to meet. We sat in a cafe and I handed her a few copies of the messages. She read, then leaned back and said, "I thought I was crazy for a long time." That's when it hit me. One of the aims of people like her is to make others question their reality. When one person stands up and says, "No, you weren't crazy, that happened," it changes everything. The dominoes began to fall. People started bringing their own stories forward, not because I told them to, but because once one person spoke, others felt safe to speak too. There were small victories. A mutual friend confronted her privately and refused to be manipulated. Another returned a gift she'd given after remembering a hurtful comment that had accompanied it. And one woman who was close to her partner confronted him with the timeline I gently shared. He was forced to reckon with the fact that things did not add up. Trust eroded. You might be wondering, did I ever worry I'd gone too far? Absolutely. There were nights where I questioned whether I had become the very thing I despised, an orchestrator of pain. But then I'd remember my dad's last night, and the image of that casual betrayal, and the emptiness of the funeral yard, and I'd flip the switch back to resolve. What I did wasn't about making her suffer for suffering's sake. It was about making sure she could no longer weaponize intimacy without consequence. And then, finally, the big one. The moment when the people who mattered most to her stopped believing her. It didn't happen all at once. It was a slow bleed. Her boyfriend, who'd been her strongest defender, began to ask questions he hadn't before. One evening, he confronted her with the timeline and asked why things didn't add up. She snapped loudly and dramatically, and in that burst of anger, she revealed herself in a way she couldn't take back. He walked out. Mutual friends who had been fence-sitters watched the scene, horrified. The next day, messages poured in. "Are you okay? What happened?" The ones who mattered didn't offer support to the drama. They asked for explanations. And she, without a plausible defense, froze. The climax wasn't a single cinematic scene. It was a series of small, unavoidable rejections. Canceled plans, unanswered calls, social invitations that evaporated. She tried to stage a public reconciliation at a cafe with a carefully scripted speech, but the woman she'd most hurt stood up and told the truth with a quiet, devastating clarity that left no room for performance. People shifted their chairs away from her. The queen bee was unseated by the very people who had once fed her crown. I watched all of this with a complicated ache in my chest. Satisfaction flickered through me like lightning, sharp, electric, and brief. But it was mixed with sorrow, because endings are messy, even when they're deserved. The night her boyfriend left, she called me long and ugly voicemails, alternating between blaming me and begging for sympathy. I let them play without answering. The truth is, I felt a strange pity in those moments too. Being left with your own reflection, with no one left to repeat your narrative back to you, is a punishment of a kind I never wanted for anyone. But she had given me no choice. When the dust settled, the social ground beneath us was rearranged. A few people returned to her after some time, offering guarded friendship because forgiveness is sometimes easier than loneliness. But the dynamics had altered. She no longer had the unquestioned influence she once held. People were careful around her, as people are around open flames. In the quiet aftermath, I had to reckon with what I'd done and who I had become. I wrote it all down because writing is the way I process complicated things. I wrote about the satisfaction, the small flush of triumph when someone finally acknowledged the truth. I wrote about the nights I lay awake, wondering if I had been cruel. I wrote about how in standing up for myself, I also stood up for others who had been silenced. I wrote about my daughter and how the world I wanted her to grow up in was one where people couldn't casually weaponize your pain. So, would I do all of this the same way again? Maybe. Would I have preferred to forgive and find peace? Of course. But forgiveness has to be earned, and some people never earn it. People keep asking me, be honest, would you have waited this long for payback? I don't know if it was about payback at that point. It was about truth. It was about making sure the person who so casually opened a wound in public could no longer act like the victim of her own performance. These days, I keep my circle small. I go to school drop-offs and I nod politely. Sometimes we exchange the barest of words. Hi, how are you? And that's all the contact either of us wants or needs. On my birthday, she sent a card apologizing for not being there. And although I read it twice, it made no difference. You can't patch the fabric of trust with a store-bought card. You either mend over time with consistent action, or you let the seam remain visible as a reminder. When I lay awake at night, I think about my dad and about the idea that people are mirrors. Some reflect you honestly, others distort you for their own pleasure. What I learned in this messy, painful process was that there is a price to be paid for distortion. It isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's social embarrassment. Sometimes it's losing the community that fed you. Sometimes it's the slow unraveling of the lies you once fed yourself. And sometimes, most importantly, that the people you hurt will eventually stand up and tell the truth. So what would you have done in my shoes? Would you have stayed quiet and swallowed the betrayal? Would you have confronted her publicly in the moment and made a scene? Or would you have done precisely what I did? Plan, wait, gather facts, and pull the thread until the whole sweater came apart? There's no right answer here. Just messy human choices. I ended up choosing a path that felt right to me. A path that honored my father's memory by refusing to let his passing be turned into gossip. A path that honored myself by refusing to be gaslit into silence. And in the end, I didn't seek to ruin a life. I simply refused to let mine be ruined in silence. And that made all the difference. My best friend betrayed me on the day my dad died. And I don't think I'll ever forgive her. Let that sink in for a second. Because even saying those words out loud feels like fire in my throat. Imagine the worst day of your life. The day you're already on your knees, broken, begging the world to just pause and give you one breath of peace. And then imagine the one person you trusted most driving a knife straight through your back on that very day. That's my story. That's what happened to me. My dad, he was my anchor. He was the one who taught me to ride a bike, who cheered at every small victory, who always said, life will kick you down, but you don't stay there. You stand back up. When he was diagnosed with cancer in May, stage 4, it spread everywhere. It was like the ground fell out from under me. By July, the disease had already taken too much, and he made the hardest choice a human can make. euthanasia. I didn't want it, but he was clear. He didn't want to suffer, and he didn't want us to suffer watching him fade. On the Friday it was scheduled, I held his hand as he took his final breath, and I swear to you, I thought my soul split in half. But here's where the betrayal comes in. In those last weeks, I only told 2 people. My 2 best friends of nearly 20 years. I begged them not to tell anyone. Begged. And on the very day my dad passed, one of them casually admitted she'd already told her boyfriend, and worse, she told someone I considered my enemy. My stomach dropped to the floor. I couldn't even process it. And when I confronted her, when I said, "How could you?" Do you know what she said? Not, "I'm so sorry." Not, "I messed up." No, she smirked and said, "Oh, she already knew." Which was impossible. Even if it were true, she had no right. No apology, just excuses. That's when it hit me. In 20 years of friendship, she had never once apologized to me for anything. Meanwhile, I'd been bending, bowing, apologizing 1,000 times over just to keep the peace. And now, on the worst day of my life, she showed me who she really was. Then came the funeral. And if you've ever been to one, you know. What happens outside the service can matter just as much as what happens inside. When her mom died, we all stood outside together. When another friend's grandpa died, same thing. It was tradition. You show up, you hold hands, you stand with the grieving. But when it was my dad, I walked outside and everyone was gone. My so-called best friends had left me standing there alone. Do you know the kind of silence that rings in your ears at a moment like that? That's when grief doubled. I wasn't just burying my dad. I was burying friendships I thought would last forever. So, I left the group chat. I pulled away. And still, she kept blowing up my phone like she was entitled to my forgiveness without ever giving me an apology. Every time I saw her name pop up, it was like salt in a wound. And the worst part? Our kids go to the same daycare and school, so I couldn't even escape. I felt trapped. For a while, I thought walking away was enough. But here's the thing about betrayal. It plants a seed. At first, it's pain. Then it's anger. And if you leave it alone long enough, it becomes clarity. And clarity told me one thing. She had walked all over me for years, and I had let her. She had manipulated, gossiped, lied, spread secrets, and never once paid the price. Well, not anymore. That's when the idea of revenge was born. Now, I'm not someone who blows up right away. I wasn't about to scream in her face or throw punches in the school parking lot. Revenge, I realized, works best slow. Methodical. You let them believe they're safe, then you pull the rug out from under them. So I started where she'd hurt me. Secrets. For years, she'd whispered about people in our group, spilled their insecurities, mocked their choices, even made up lies when the truth wasn't juicy enough. And I had a vault of it all in my head. Stories she'd sworn me to secrecy on. Stories that weren't hers to tell. If she could hand over my dad's euthanasia to my enemy, why should I protect her anymore? So I reached out to old friends, gently, rebuilding connections, making small talk, and then, like laying breadcrumbs, I let little truths slip. Funny, she once said you were insecure about that. Or, didn't she tell me you hated that thing she's now praising you for? And like dominoes fell, the doubts started falling. People began questioning, and nothing destroys a queen bee faster than doubt in her hive. But gossip wasn't enough. She thrived on being the center of attention, the one everyone leaned on. So I planned to take that from her, to isolate her until the silence around her was deafening. The perfect chance came at a big group event. Everyone was there, including her. She was glowing, laughing, waving at me like we were besties again. I smiled politely, calm on the outside, but with my heart pounding so hard it shook my chest. And when the moment was right, I dropped the first bomb. A story she'd told me about another girl in the group. Cruel and twisted. I didn't exaggerate. I didn't need to. The truth was poison enough. You should have seen the look on her face when heads turned to her, eyes narrowing. And I didn't stop. One by one, I let the receipts out. Old texts, screenshots, things she thought were buried. Her own words did the damage. She tried to deny it, but with proof staring her in the face, denial was useless. By the end of the night, the queen bee was dethroned. People avoided her, whispered about her, looked at her with disgust. She was exposed. And I thought maybe that was enough. But here's the twist. She didn't back off. She doubled down. She started spinning new lies, trying to make me the villain, saying I was bitter, that grief made me lash out, that I was jealous of her life. And for a second, people listened. That's when I realized the job wasn't finished. So I pushed further. I knew her weaknesses, the cracks in her perfect image. And the biggest? Her relationship. She loved to brag about her boyfriend, about how perfect they were. But behind closed doors, she complained about him constantly. Told me about his flaws, his mistakes, his secrets. And I had proof. Screenshots, messages, even voice notes she'd forgotten she sent me. It wasn't hard to make sure those little truths found their way back to him. Quietly, carefully, through people who wouldn't trace it back to me. And when he confronted her, she crumbled. Because lies can't survive under pressure forever. Within weeks, her relationship was in shambles. Her friendships were in shambles. Her reputation? Ruined. And me? I didn't have to lift a finger after the first moves. The dominoes fell on their own. Would you have stopped there? Be honest. If someone betrayed you on the day your parent died, would you have let them off easy? Or would you have made sure they understood once and for all that trust is not a toy? For me, it wasn't about cruelty. It was about balance. About finally letting her feel the sting she had made so many others feel. And when I saw her later, standing alone at an event where she once commanded the room, I felt something I hadn't since my dad's death. Peace.